Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for joining us. My name is Olga Atamanova, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation today. It's day 261 of our fight for freedom. The situation on the front lines within last day changes dramatically. Our armed forces advance very actively and liberate our land. So today we prepared the following events for you. At 13 o'clock, we will have Sergei Khlan, deputy of Kherson Regional Council, join us, and we'll talk about the situation in Kherson region. At 14 o'clock, we will have Pavlo Kirilenko join us online. He's the head of Donetsk Regional Military Administration, and we'll talk about the situation in Donetsk region. Currently joining us is Taras Shevchenko, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine, and we'll talk about the results of the ministry work in the information front. Mr. Taras, good afternoon, please. Thank you, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to congratulate everybody with liberation of the new villages and towns in Kherson region. I think that all the Ukrainians are currently tracking very actively the situation with the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces and liberation of the Ukrainian lands. And after the liberation of these lands, one of the first tasks specifically of our ministry will be the return to these territories and part of Mykolaiv region of the access of the Ukrainian citizens to the Ukrainian mass media by all means possible. In the same way as in previous month, the ministry's priority was the provision of the information to the citizens of Ukraine who live in the liberated areas of the Kharkiv region and in part of Donetsk region and Lugansk region. And based on this experience, I think that we plan to act accordingly in the more or less the same manner. In view of the fact that usually during liberation there is a problem with the access to electric power and internet, the quickest mean of communication and information is the printed media. That's why we organized it in Kharkiv region. The issue of two editorials, Obry of Izumshina, which was issued first. We got involved our partners organizations, international organizations who supported this printed media issue to be re-established in the quickest manner possible. Even before the power went back on, people already had an opportunity to get the new information, the actual information, and the experience shows that the information vacuum that was existing for half a year, it meant that people in principle did not have any normal understanding of what was going on in the non-occupied areas in the capital during the time when those people were in occupation. And this is one of the top priority tasks, to work with the access of the citizens to information. In the same way, they can come to authorities to ask about the way the power supply and water supply will be reestablished and all relevant questions they have after their towns and villages are being liberated by the Ukrainian armed forces. So the same plans will be implemented in the newly liberated areas of Kherson region. I mean the access of the citizens to the printed media. We understand how complicated the situation is at the moment with the power supply, not only in the liberated areas, but throughout the whole of Ukraine in general. So I think the government will do everything possible to reestablish the supply in the shortest manner possible, because when everything works to the full extent, when there is normal power supply, normal internet, we can reestablish the air, the translation through satellite antennas, the access to the state TV marathon. which, according to the questioning provided among the citizens, is one of the most important means of information they have access to. The Secretariat of Cabinet of Ministers and the Security Council prepares the new sanction package for the new Russians who are included in that list to a very big extent. In the same way, we're in a very active dialogue with the governments of other countries, with our partners, in order to have the sanctions among the Russian mass media to be applied to the fullest extent possible in the most of the countries possible. We find sometimes some white spots, and we appeal to Switzerland, for example, recently, to have them apply the sanctions against Russia Today television channel in full in Switzerland. A very important area of the work, specifically during this fall and winter period, is European integration. And with regard to our task in the area of European integration is the adaptation by Ukrainian legislation of the audio and visual European media component. It's the legislation which was adopted on the 30th of August this year. There were more than 2,500 amendments submitted to this law, and with bated breath we were waiting for the opinion of the Committee of the European Union, and we received them finally. And in my opinion, the comments we received are quite working and not so big in volume. I was expecting to see a lot more issues, and these days, together with the working group, with all our partners who are involved to a great extent, specifically National Council for Television and Radio Broadcasting, and representatives of the working groups from the civil society, non-government organizations, from the industry, in dialogue with the European experts, with the experts of European Commission, of European Council, who provided their comments even before. We all work together to work out to remove all the comments and remarks, and within the shortest terms possible. We hope that it will happen this year to adopt the media legislation. The draft law is not exhaustive 100% in terms of the issues related to the full implementation of audiovisual directive, because they don't touch the issues related to advertising legislation. Audiovisual directive has a small number of provisions on the advertising. They are not included in the media law. So we work on the changes to the amendments to the advertisement legislation to implement the audiovisual directive into Ukrainian legislation. To comply with all the requirements, Ukraine is facing on the way to full-fledged membership in the European Union. Our expert council on mitigation on the consequences of totalitarianism and Russification, who had a briefing a week ago in this hall. This week we had another meeting. It was a separate meeting where the Kyiv regional administration officers were invited, and it was dedicated to the mitigation of the consequences of totalitarianism and Russification in the city of Kyiv. However, within the last years, and even 30 years and 8 years, many things were done in Kyiv. Still, there is some unfinished business. What was mostly emphasized during our last meeting and in recommendations adopted During this last meeting, the most attention was drawn to the monuments of Mykola Shores and General Vatutin in Mariinsky Park. The expert council recommended, and the municipal council agreed to that because they gave their comments right away during the meeting that the monuments will be disassembled and relocated. Besides, Kyiv Municipal Council activated the work of its commission to list the objects which are subject to removal, different memorial boards, monuments, breast monuments, where there's attention was also brought to the breast monuments, chest monuments located in the university metro station. We submitted an application to the municipal council, and they agreed to remove some of them. Some of the city libraries are about to be renamed. Is the job of the municipal council, but our job is to bring their attention, to draw their attention to this issue, because for us the publication of the active citizens who write about this in their social media, not mandatorily they go to us directly, but monitoring the information space, we see it, we mark it, and we bring it up to the government level to adopt relevant resolutions. Many public libraries still bear the names, are still named after the Russians, which doesn't quite catch up with the modern reality. And we see a huge demand from the Ukrainian citizens for renaming, for removal of the monuments installed by the Russian regime, dedicated to some imperial personalities or Soviet personalities. Many things were done after 2014, but it turns out that there is still a big work to be done in this regard, with makes us and the municipal council to bring a lot of these objects to the field of public discussion with regard to removal or relocation. The next subject we continue working on, and which was developing within the last month, I want to remind you about the week of media literacy for the ministries. Since it's being headed by the Minister Alexander Tkachenko, the subject of media literacy was identified as the top priority in terms of information security. You probably know we established the national project filter on media literacy, and having seen that in the international level there are weeks of media literacy no one was noticing in Ukraine previously. Well, there were some minor attempts, but in fact almost nobody knew about them except for some very specialized people. Last year and this year, even more attention was drawn to the opportunity to draw people's attention during these specific dates. In particular, during this week, there was a test held, which was integrated into national TV marathon. So many Ukrainians found out about this test from the marathon, and more than 32,000 Ukrainian citizens started the test, and about 17,000 made it to the last question. And among those who gave the correct answers, we had some prizes awarded to them with the support of our partners from USAID, and with also the the embassies of Sweden, support us in this project filter in terms of media literacy in general. Our Center of Strategic Communications and Information Security, which is located quite close here in this area. So within the autumn period, apart from the main tasks fulfilled by the center in coordination with other government authorities, managing their Telegram channels, broadcasting information, much attention was paid to the education projects, development of different training courses for government officers, which may officially be integrated into the programs of the improvement of qualification of the government officers. There were trainings provided in the School of Disinformation in cooperation with the partners from Swedish Embassy and Center for Democracy and the Rule of Law. And a few more words. Our TV channel Freedom has some skeptical attitude from some, but we think that the Russian-speaking channel is quite important, just along with the information that is broadcasted in Ukrainian and in English languages by the enterprises which submit to the ministry at that moment, because this Freedom TV channel works for Russian audience mostly. During World War II, Great Britain was working with the German language information when they tried to broadcast it to the enemy citizens. What we're trying to broadcast now to Russian Federation, I think it's successful, and I think it's correct, efficient, and quite relevant. And if there is also a need for English language information, of course, but the spread of the true information to the citizens of Russian Federation is one of the most important tasks for us, because it can, and I'm sure it does, influence the events on the front lines, bringing closer our victory, and helps deliver the truth about Ukraine in a language that is in which many citizens consume the information. And in these conditions, when Russian Federation invests huge budget into broadcasting their propaganda media, it's very difficult to find the information, the faithful information about Ukraine among all those fakes spreaded by Russia. And the general total figures, I will remind you, the Freedom TV channel started its broadcasting in March, and up to today it has more than 4 billion views. For example, as per Google Analytics, the audience from Russia is 53%. I mean, the audience of this Freedom TV channel, and the other large fraction is from Kazakhstan. So I have to remark that Russian news in foreign languages were broadcasted all the time, even during years 14-19, and the then government was talking about this as of something that was needed to be done, and now their position somehow changed dramatically. I think that even what is being done by Ukraine in these terms is very important. I was working with different type of expertise on the TV channel UTR back then, and many critical remarks were coming in regard that the broadcasting is conducted in a number of languages in the same channel, and I think that broadcasting in a non-state language is still something that has to be done. It's the strongest now and is the best now comparing to what we had before. We still have a space to develop, and I'm thankful that even the private TV channels are involved in production, and I know that it improves the quality of the product, creating healthy competition, and it helps us achieve our results. Mr. Taras, let's start with the questions of the mitigation of the consequences of Russification and totalitarianism. We've really seen within the last week or maybe a few last weeks certain movements in that direction. We see that the work is being done. As to the monuments, for example, like to Katerina, which was most widely discussed in the society, we see that there are some movements there, but did you make it, I mean, as the expert council who works with the ministry to communicate with the local authorities? And will there be any movements with regard of that monuments? Judging by the news we see within the last week, there are some movements because already the inhabitants of the city, they voted in their majority to have the monument removed, and the municipal authority reported on their plans as well. The expert council considered this issue about Odessa during one of the first meetings, and Alexander Tkachenko personally communicated with the municipal authorities as to the destiny of that monument. So these discussions added up and they transform into certain actions. The expert council had a dialogue with such a city as Poltava, and I would like to expect some movements in Poltava as well. I mean, in terms of those imperial monuments like Peter the First, the Battle of Poltava, that I hope there will be positive movements as well. Another question, as to the occupied territories, specifically in Kherson region, probably yesterday there was information that the occupants, when they were withdrawing, they destroyed the TV tower. And are we ready for this? And where are we going to take money for the quick renewal? Are we going to have our international partners involved, or will it be funded by the state budget? Well, the first task is to gain full control over the territory, to assess the situation, and then to talk about some specific plans, because it's contingency plans. Now we only have the news from the telegram. We have to take control and we have to provide power supply in the territories. In any case, after we get some specific information, some faithful information, we will consider different options for broadcasting to cover the Kherson region and the city of Kherson with the TV signal. And everybody understands that if this temporary line will go along the bank of Dnieper, everything that will be close to Dnieper will be under threat of strikes, threat of bombardment, and it might complicate the construction works at the objects that may be shelled. But the first thing is to gain the full control over the territory, to assess the losses, the costs, and the cost of renewal. As to the Freedom Channel, there were a lot of discussions, not only in expert crowds, but in civil society as well, and regarding the fact that our officials speak Russian there, and their statements are not being translated into Russian, and also the speeches by the Russian experts, not even in Freedom Channel, but in our TV Marathon. How is it relevant? Well, first question, thank you for the question. First, when Ukrainian government officials speak Russian, when we've seen these critics in media, in expert publications, there was a discussion where the representatives of civil organizations invited to. I think it was happening back in June, July. And after that, the approach was changed, and part of the representatives of Ukrainian government, they speak Ukrainian with translation into Russian language. So we withdrew from that practice of speaking in Russian. Well, obviously it's broadcasted for Russian Federation first of all, but the argument for us was that the translation specifically shows that we have our language and we are different, so that Russians could not, at the level of their conscious or subconscious, think that everybody speaks only Russian here, because this is how it's showed on the channel. So some do speak Russian, but the majority speak Ukrainian with translation, with interpretation into Russian. So I don't see any more critics in this regard on this subject. So I think we corrected our policy in the right way. As to the involvement of the experts from Russian Federation, I think this approach is correct. If we want, and we do want, us to be watched first of all in Russia, we need to achieve this goal. We need to engage Russian experts to gain advantage on our side and to make use of it. We have to do it. Thank you, dear colleagues. Your questions, please. Vitaly Holod, Ukrinform. Mr. Taras, could you please tell us? You said there were the issue of 2 newspapers reestablished in the deoccupied areas, and as to the printing facilities, I know that these newspapers are being printed in central and western Ukraine, and then the newspapers are being brought there. So will the printing houses be rebuilt, the printing facilities be rebuilt? Thank you for the question. It's a part of the printing infrastructure that is being located in Kharkiv region, and it's a very significant part of it. One fraction of it was damaged, and I think it's right to mouth the right information about what was rebuilt and reestablished, so because the enemy can use this information to his advantage. Another question, as to the media legislation. In the journalist community, there are a lot of skeptics as to this in terms of this legislation. How can it be adopted? Do you communicate with the national, for example, journalist trade union to discuss the implementation of this legislation? Yes, thank you. We cooperate with everybody. We communicate with everybody, with the representatives of the journalist union, and many journalists expressed their remarks or even protest in this regard. Almost all other public organizations, their position in this concern is quite soft. Even since my work in the journalist community, all the civil organizations in the media crowds, there are always some protest, there is some antagonism, even in the issues which seem to be quite in which we should see some solidarity. For example, about beating journalists, there are still people who have very contrary positions, and different positions in media community are not surprising to me. But yes, we are open to communication with everybody, with the journalist community, and we had a separate discussion with them about the legislation. We want to have everybody express their opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean that all their opinions will be considered, but they all have to be expressed and heard by the government. That's what should be guaranteed by the state. Mr. Taras, another question as to the regional journalists. We understand that many of them had to leave from those areas which were temporarily occupied, and now that our armed forces are advancing very actively, We hope that the regional journalists will go back to their regions. Do you have any plans to reestablishment of their activity there? I mean, in terms of support of reestablishment of their activities there. Well, obviously, for example, in the case of Kherson, it will be more even sensible than in other regions, because it's the only regional center which was captured during this war, and within some short period it will get back under Ukrainian control, and we will give all support possible, including financial support. I know that our international partners who have grant funds to support journalist activities, and they may even in a more steady manner provide such kind of support, even with regard of the reestablishment of printed media in Kharkiv region. It was easier for us to coordinate it with international organizations to have those projects funded, and moreover, this media community asks for financing from the government, and my personal thought that the mechanisms developed by the international organizations are better and are more efficient and faster in terms of providing steady support. And maybe we will open Ukraine Media Center in Kherson as well. Mr. Taras, thank you very much for this conversation. I will remind you, we had Taras Shevchenko with us, the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy. Our next briefing is at 1300, and we'll talk about the situation in Kherson region. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Thank you.